Okay, welcome to the video 1 of Sculptris tutorials. Okay, let me just show you what happens when you open up Sculptris. You end up with a screen that looks something like this. I've actually just got some floating images that I'm using another app, so I could talk to you in a lesson about how to use this app to have images for reference floating above your Sculptris app. Now, the first thing I want to show you is that when you've got Sculptris open, if there's ever an error with your Sculptris brushes, like for example if that brush size mysteriously changes size without you adjusting the size slider, all you need to do to fix that small little bug in the program is click the button right up here, restore down, and then maximize back. And that usually fixes that error where the circle, the orange circle, changes sizes in a bizarre sort of fashion. Okay, so let me show you what you need to do. You need to open up some inspiration looking at the sculptures of Henry Moore. Then you need to start with your grab brush. Shortcut is G, but I just click on grab, and I make sure that global's turned off. If global's turned on, then when I use the grab brush, there's no orange circle, it just moves the entire object. If I turn global off, then I've got an orange brush, and I can grab vertices. Now you can't see the vertices until you turn on W, wireframe mode. Now, I also want to turn off symmetry. So if symmetry is on, just click that and turn it off. And it says this is a one-way operation. Okay? Yes. Okay. I'm actually going to undo and get back to my sphere, and then turn off symmetry. Okay, now I need to talk to you about the two little things that might cause your computer to crash. Your detail slider here refers to how many triangles there are. Now when you start out, let's start a fresh scene, new sphere, new scene. When you start out, the number of triangles you have is down here in the bottom left corner, 2048 triangles. Now, let's just say I'm using the draw button brush. And let's just say I have a small brush size. So I'm going to bring it all the way to the left and put strength somewhere in the middle. And perhaps that brush is too small to show you. Make it a little bit bigger. And now if I just make one if I just make one simple brush stroke, look at how many triangles that created. So it went from 2,000 approximately to 58,000. And it looks white, but if you were to zoom in using your mouse wheel, you can see it's actually tiny little triangles. That will, quite quickly, after just a couple brush strokes, cause your computer to crash and you'll lose your sculpture. So, rule number 1, do not use tiny little brushes like that. Keep your brush size at least 1/3 of the way over or further. Okay, so I'm going to start right in the middle like that. And you can see my brush size there. And now if I do a brush stroke, it does not make a huge amount of triangles. It does make more triangles. We look down here, it went from 2,000 to 7,000, but that's manageable. Okay? Right, the other thing you need to know about is this detail slider here. If you've got the detail slider all the way to the right, when you make your brush strokes, the triangles will be smaller. Okay? If I have the detail slider all the way to the left, the triangles will be larger. Now, the smaller the triangles, the more detail you can capture. Alright? So as you can see, if I have these large triangles, I can't get much detail into the sculpture there because you can see it's just turning into facets rather than smooth curves. If I have my detail slider all the way to the right, however, and I do that, you can see that it adds loads of tiny triangles. Right? Well, that's okay, unless I start to maybe use a slightly smaller brush now, and you can see that the triangles are getting so small. And if I look down here at the bottom left corner, I've got 30,000 already. And if I just turn off W for a minute, 30,000 triangles to represent what is actually not a very detailed object. And the other bad thing about tiny triangles is you can't get smoothness. So with triangles that are too small, like in this area here, your sculpture is going to look a little bit lumpy. Right, so let's just say that you've added those tiny triangles by accident and you don't want to undo, you just want to remove some of these triangles. Here's what you do. First of all, set your detail slider in general about halfway over. That's what you need to do in general. Also, don't have your size of your brush too small, so 1/3 across or further. And then now I want to go and remove some of these extra triangles that I don't want to help me smooth out my model. I'm going to click on the button above the W, which says Reduce Selected. And you can see it's already reduced now down to 25,000 triangles. I'm going to click it again. 25,000, it went down to 18,000 triangles. Click it a few times. Now I'm down to 8,000, and that's a bit better. If I turn off the W, you can see it's a bit smoother. And now I can use my smooth brush, which is under the grab brush. And with my smooth brush, I tend to like the strength down pretty low, because if I have it all the way up, it's going to smooth too fast. So it melts the surface, and it goes a bit too fast. If I want to use the smooth brush, I generally have the strength slider down maybe about 10%, and then I just gently smooth. And if it's not happening fast enough, then you can move the strength slider up a little bit. Okay, and you can see I'm smoothing the sculpture. If I turn on W, you can see perhaps it's not smoothing very well because these triangles are too tiny. So I'm just going to go get instead of this time Reduce Selected, I'll show you the other option. Next to the Reduce Selected is the Reduce Brush. And I can go just in this specific area right here, click a few times, and that reduces the number of triangles in that specific area rather than the entire model. Now if I go get my Smooth tool and turn off the W so you can see, it's not as lumpy. Okay, so those are just a couple rules to avoid problems. I generally like to keep the wireframe visible so that if I accidentally start to draw something with a brush that's too tiny, I can automatically say that that's okay. But if I have that brush too small and I do that, that kind of tiny triangles, which if I zoom in you can see, those tiny triangles there will definitely cause my computer to crash. So I'm actually going to press Ctrl Z and undo that. Boost my size up a bit. And now do that. Now, what does strength slider do? Well, it affects how strong the brush is. So this is called the crease brush. And I'm making, let's just pretend that those are lips or something. It went in a certain amount. Well, if I undo that, and now I have the strength slider all the way up, let's see how that affects the brush. It goes in quite sharp and quite fast. I generally like to have strength maybe about 50% or a little bit further. And then if I want it to go in deeper, I just very carefully go over it again carefully. Okay, let's look at some of the other brushes. Actually, before we do that, let me start a new sphere and show you how to start your project. So, new sphere, new scene. I generally start out most of my projects with the grab brush, with a high strength and a relatively large size. Okay, now I've turned off symmetry, so I'll do that. And now I want to look at this sculpture here, and it helps to look at the sculpture from different angles, as you can see here. So I'm not going to copy the sculpture exactly, but I want the same types of forms. So I'm going to zoom out a bit and do that. And you can see that some of those triangles are stretching out quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is move my detail slider slightly to the right a little bit more. And now you can see maybe if I get a slightly smaller brush size as well, I can have a medium amount of triangles. Okay, just look at some of these shapes I'm making here. So to navigate around your model, just like in SketchUp, we've got a method where we can orbit around the model, and to do that you just go outside of the model, click and hold the left mouse button, and you can orbit around the model. Okay. If you orbit around the model and then press Shift at the same time, it'll snap to whatever the closest view is. And this is quite useful because I can see down there, this is the front view. Then if I go like that and then hold Shift, that's the left side. If I go back to the front view and then I go like this, that's the right side. And I can go to a top view. And every once in a while I notice that students tend to end up working on the back of their model like that, but it's upside down. So when I move my mouse to the left, the model moves to the right. And if I move my mouse to the right, the model moves to the left. And it's very counterintuitive. So what you've done there by mistake is you've turned the model upside down. So what you need to do is turn it right side up again. And now when I move my mouse to the left, the model moves to the left. And I move my mouse to the right, the model moves to the right. Okay, so orbiting is very important so that you can work on your sculpture from all different angles. It's not really good enough for your model to look interesting from just the front view, because the nature of sculpture is you can walk all the way around it. Okay, so the other thing you'll need to know how to do is to zoom out and zoom in, and that's simple. It's just the mouse wheel. Okay, and then this next is panning around the object. So essentially moving my camera view, not orbiting my camera, but just moving my camera. And to do that, you also click out here, but you also at the same time hold down the Alt button or the Command button. So ALT, which is directly to the left of the space bar. And I think it's called Command, or maybe it's an Apple key, I'm not sure. Next to the space bar is the Alt button on a PC. And then you just click out here and you can do that. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a couple of the brushes. We've got the grab brush, and if global is on, it just moves the whole object. So just remember, if it doesn't do anything, turn global off. Okay. The smooth brush I like to think about like as if the sculpture is made of wax, and now I'm just shooting it with a little bit of a flame to melt it a little bit. That's kind of like the way I like to think of the smooth brush. Okay. If I want to flatten an area, for example, I could use the flatten brush. Let's just say I want to flatten this face right here. Well, it's kind of unusual. Let me show you the different methods. If I turn off angle and lock plane, that flatten will kind of follow around the curve. Let me turn off the wireframe for a second so you can see. That flatten kind of follows around the curve, and that's a good method. Let's undo that. If I turn on angle fall off for flatten, now if I just do that, it's similar. You can see how it still follows around the curve. But let's say I want it to be all on one plane, coplanar. Turn on lock plane and then hold the button down and do that, and it'll make one flat little surface like that. Okay. You might notice that if there aren't enough triangles, let's turn the wireframe on, you might get some weird ridges there. So what you could do is you could turn on your detail slider and just touch those areas. Maybe that's too much. Let's turn off our wireframe for a second and see what happens. Okay, I like to just hit it with the smooth brush. Now you're probably wondering, how did I smooth that without changing to the smooth brush? Well, to smooth, because smooth is used quite a bit, the shortcut for that is just to hold down the Shift key. So not caps lock, but Shift. And if I'm flattening, and then I want to smooth that corner, I can just hold down Shift and do that, and it smooths it. So flatten, and then Shift to smooth. And it'll go to Shift no matter what brush you've got. So if I've got my grab brush, and I grab that, and then I want to smooth under here, I just hold down Shift, and it'll smooth. Okay, so let's look at a few more brushes, and then that'll be the end of this first video. We've got the grab brush we've talked about. We've got the flatten brush and the smooth brush. Let's look at inflate. Okay, so if you've grabbed something, let's turn the wireframe on for a second. If you've grabbed something and done something like that, it's interesting, but what if I want it to be a bit chunkier? Right? It's a bit difficult, but it's not if you use the inflate brush. So what you can do with the inflate brush is just hit it like that, and then smooth with the Shift key. Hit it like that, and then smooth with the Shift key. Then I can do the opposite of inflate by holding down Alt, and then hitting it a little bit. But you've got to be really careful that you don't pinch it too much. So I think I went too far there. I'll just hold down Alt and hit it quickly, and then smooth. So inflate does just what it says on the tin. It's like a balloon, almost. Okay. If you notice that your triangles are getting too tiny, just repeat that. You can hit reduce selected a couple times. So let's go back. We've got 18,000. If I hit reduce selected, we've now got 13,000, 10,000. Okay, so it's getting more manageable now. Or you can use the reduce brush and hit it only in the areas where you think, I've got a few too many triangles. So I can just hit it there a few times, or you can draw with it. If you think you've got too many triangles in a certain area, like on this flat area, I don't really need that many triangles in the middle bit. Okay? Remember, the reason we have smaller triangles is to help us define more detailed areas. So that sharp area there, we actually need those tiny triangles. For that sharp area there, we actually need those tiny triangles. But in the middle bit, we don't. And as we come out here, we don't really need them. Larger radius areas where it's smoother, we don't need as many triangles. But then, of course, you can go too far and take away too many triangles, and then you end up with facets. Now, facets are fine if you want them, but if you, for example, got the grab brush and had the detail slider all the way down, then you've got these facets. If you don't want those, then you'll have to boost your detail slider up a bit. I'll undo that there. And then just tap there. Okay, maybe that's too small. Move the detail slider to the left, tap there, and now we can smooth it with the Shift key. Okay, a couple more brushes. The draw brush. You can build up form. So let's get a slightly larger brush there. We can build up form in a certain area. Now here's another case where if it goes too fast, it starts to look really lumpy. So what I do instead is boost the strength slider for the draw brush quite low, like that. And then you can build up just by going over the same area. Okay. And this draw brush also has an alternative. So next to the spacebar, if you press ALT or Alt for alternative, then it goes in instead of coming out. So you can carve away to make a concave surface. You can add up without Alt to make a convex surface. Again, I can hold down Shift to smooth some of this area. I can boost up the detail slider if I feel like I need a little bit more detail in a certain area. Okay, so let me carve in here. And I'm doing all of this with a mouse. If you have a graphics tablet, it is quite fun to use a pen, but to be honest, sculpting is just as easy with a mouse, as opposed to perhaps digital painting, where it's much better to have a tablet and a pen. Okay, now let's look at using the grab tool, bringing perhaps that out a little bit, maybe making a slightly larger brush, bringing that out a bit. And by the way, I'm not copying this sculpture, I'm only showing you that you, when you do yours, should have a sculpture image open just to refer to for ideas. Okay? Now let's look at this right there and use the pinch brush. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing, and I'm just going to pinch those vertices near each other. Okay, and if I turn off the W, you can see a bit better what I've just done. Okay, so I'm pinching the vertices to make them closer together. Okay, if you want to undo that, or if you want to unpinch something, you can always just click it with the inflate tool and it spreads them out a little bit. Okay, again, the smooth tool is another way to unpinch something. And I think we're almost done. Let's just look at the crease tool, which I showed you earlier. And the crease tool will make, I'll turn the W on so you can see if there's enough triangles, you can see a nice pinch there. So it pinches and goes in at the same time. If it happens too fast, it means you've got your strength slider up too much. And here's a case where, again, if you have a tiny little brush, it'll cause way too many triangles and cause your computer to crash. So do try to use the pinch brush and the draw brush and the crease brush with a relatively medium-sized brush size. Okay. If you think it's not adding enough triangles, then you can just move your detail slider up a little bit and then try it again. If you think it's going in too deep, move your strength slider down to the middle, and then if you need to go deeper, just go over it a second time. That's what I like to do. And see what that looks like. I can smooth by holding down Shift. Made a little pinch there. I could use the flatten brush. Maybe I'll turn off both angle, fall off, and lock plane and get a little bit larger brush. Okay, so I can do interesting things like that. Let's say you've got some details in there that you really don't want. Turn your wireframe on and you've decided you don't want that detail, you want to smooth it out. Let's just exaggerate the detail a little bit more with a lot of detail. Even more. And you have wireframe off and you try to smooth it and you just can't smooth it. That detail will not go away. The way to get rid of that detail is to turn on the wireframe and use your reduce brush. And you can even boost the strength up of the reduce brush and click in that area until your triangles look a bit more like the triangles over in a surrounding area that is smooth. Then use Shift to smooth. Okay, still got some smaller triangles in there. I can do that and then smooth. And that's how to get rid of detail if you add too many details that you don't want. Okay, you can change the material. This is red wax. I'll turn off the wireframe so you can see. You can even choose some fun materials. Now these are great for your final rendering, but they can be difficult to use while you're actually sculpting. I'll tell you probably the worst ones to actually sculpt with would be the metallic ones. They look awesome for the final rendering, but it's very difficult to see the nuances of the texture. It's very difficult to see the texture with these materials because there's so many reflections. So I honestly recommend using one of the more plain materials, like the red wax, for example. Okay, once you've done a sculpture that you like, let's just add a few more details to this. Let's say you've got the draw button, brush, and you're drawing, okay, and then let's just say accidentally you press enable for this brush mask, okay. Let's say you just have enable on by mistake and you didn't realize that you actually clicked that. When you start to draw, nothing's happening at all, okay. So if you're ever drawing with the draw brush or one of the other brushes and nothing's happening, either check that this enable is actually turned off, and I'll go into another tutorial about how to use this feature, and now all of a sudden it works again. Okay. Okay. Let's see how we can save this so that you can make a 3D print of it. To save it, you need to go to the bottom right button, right there, and you need to say Save. And I'm going to create a folder called Sculptris. So I've already got one, it's called Sculptris. And I'm going to name it. I'm going to call this Henry Moore Sculpt 1 and press Save. Okay. Let's say New Sphere. I should have shown you that actually. You can say New Scene or you can say Add Object. So if you're doing a completely new sculpture, click New Scene. If you want to add something to this, click Add Object, put your sphere somewhere, and then you can use things like Scale with Global On this time to scale it down. Grab, and here's where you would have Global On to move that sphere where you want it. So let's say I want it on the tip there. Orbit around until you get a good view. Maybe I want to make it slightly bigger. Go back to Scale. Scale and grab with Global On means that you can affect the object that's selected. Then I can go to Grab and turn Global Off. And here's where I might start to change the shape of the object that's selected. Okay. If I want to rotate that object in relationship to the other object, I can click on Rotate, turn Global On, click in the center of it, and then I can rotate it around like so. Okay. Orbit around my view this way, click on the center of it, rotate it around that way. Okay. You notice how this is highlighted. If I want to start sculpting on my other one, just grab your sculpting brush, click on the object you want to sculpt. In this case I have to turn Global Off before I use Grab, and then you can continue sculpting on the other object. So let's say I want to use the Crease tool. Click on the object you want to crease, adjust your brush settings, and then click on the object you want to crease, adjust your brush settings, etc. Okay, so I think I'm going to cut this video short because it'll be a lot more fun for you to try out all these features, and then hopefully I'll be able to book the computer room for at least one of our lessons so I can help you do your sculptures, and I will 3D print the best ones. Okay, happy sculpting. One more thing I wanted to mention, and that is if you start using Sculptris in one day and you want to continue working on your file in another day, another time. So I'm just going to start a new scene here and pretend that we just opened up Sculptris, and this is going to be, for example, you want to carry on working on your sculpture that you started earlier. What you can't do is open up the folder where you saved your sculpture file, and you can't double click that file because the computer's not set up to automatically run Sculptris when you double click the file. So the way to do it is to run Sculptris and then click the button next to save, which is open. Navigate to where you saved your file. So in my documents I saved it in a folder called 3D, in a folder called Sculptris. There's, I believe, the one that I just saved a few minutes ago. So click on that and say open, and say New Scene, and there is the sculpture file that I saved, and I can continue to work on it. Okay, so have fun.